welcome to another Lewisburg Community TV video. This is episode 14 and we're coming to you from Tertulia.
A bookshop like no other.
It's lovely to be here again. It's summer, the sun's shining. We have lots of visitors to Westport, so it's been absolutely lovely and very busy for us in the shop. Today we've got an interview with Tom Benjamin, A Quiet Death in Italy. We meet Cauvery, who comes into the shop, so we're going to see Cauvery. Neil's going to talk about some books he's finished, and I've got some gorgeous new books who've come in this week.
Yeah, brilliant. Our Little Cruelties. Liz Nugent, who's a big fan of the shop, she came in and signed some copies of her book. This book is brilliant. It's about a dysfunctional family, and if you ever kind of get annoyed with your own family, believe me, it's nothing like this family who just totally just wild. Anyhow, it's a brilliant book and I really enjoyed it, and I've just finished that, and that's one for our customers to enjoy. And Faith Hogan's new book, What Happened to Us, is our book choice of the month for the shop, and we hope to have Faith come in and talk about this. She's from Mayo, so I'm sure she can pop down and see us fairly soon, and already we're selling loads of copies of this, and it's actually really good. So yes, great. We're looking forward to that one.
Yeah, and Faith, that's her 5th book. So yeah, she's well known, and yeah, we're enjoying selling it in the shop. So I think we're going to go over now to Cauvery Madhavan, to Lewisburg, Westport, and to our shop. So nice to have you here in our shop.
Thank you.
I know you've been on our Tertulia TV in relation to your fabulous book, The Tainted, which has been reviewed by Sebastian Barry, we've been on the radio, all sorts, and we have sold lots of copies, and we have some here signed. But I suppose it's nice that when we meet you today for you to just tell us why you write, or...
Yeah, well, I have to say now, I think I said it to you earlier when I walked in, that you're the first bookshop I visited after the lockdown was lifted, because I just felt that, what you guys did for my book sort of really kind of catapulted it, a bit for me. So I'm so happy to be here, delighted to be here.
Oh, thank you.
As to why I write, I think I always had a draw to write, even when I was a child. And I would have written for the school paper, and I wrote for my mum and dad very often. I'd have to be writing for them. And when I moved to college, I wrote for the college paper as well. And then my first job actually was in advertising, and I wrote fiction from the start. I was a copywriter.
I worked in advertising too. I was an accountant.
Okay.
Those copywriters were terrible for paperwork, but yeah.
So, I don't think there's a copywriter in the world who doesn't think there's a book in them. I've always loved writing, and I think the love for writing comes from the love for reading. And my mum and dad really kind of, inculcated that reading habit from a very young age. So.
Yeah, me too. We were talking about that earlier. And so your first book that you wrote was which one? Was it
my first book was Paddy
India. Yeah. So you were saying that it actually got published by Penguin in India, and
yes.
Then here it was by Black Amber.
Black Amber books. Yeah.
And that's a funny book.
It's funny in parts. Yeah.
Oh, it is.
Yeah, and it's interesting that even though it was written 20 years ago, the subject and the theme of the book is actually more relevant today than it was 20 years ago when it was published, because it's a story of an Indian doctor who comes to Ireland, and what happens, it's he falls in love with an Irish colleague, an Irish girl, and but it's not a love story. It's about what happens between him and his mother because of his affair with the Irish girl. So,
and the mother's in India.
The mother's in India, yeah. But I think there's, if you read the book now, nothing has changed, for foreign doctors in the UK and in Ireland. There's still there's still difficulties of, of perception of, how they're treated and stuff. It's amazing how some things don't change,
Yes.
Some themes remain the same.
Yeah, so we'd like some of them to change, but
Yeah,
they don't.
yeah.
And then you did the Uncoupling, which is lovely with the.
That's right. So the Uncoupling, I'm really, really proud of my second
Yeah.
book. Very, very proud of my second book, because I think with the first book, there was a bit of our own story. My husband and myself, a little bit of our own story in it. But with the Uncoupling, it was pure fiction, and it's the story of an older couple who are in their 60s, and they come out of India for the first time to visit their son who's working and living in the UK, and he's so busy with work that when they come over for their first holiday outside India, he sends them on a coach tour of Europe.
Oh.
And it's what happens to their marriage in those 16 days.
Oh. Wow.
So that's the Uncoupling.
Well, I'm looking forward to reading those two that you've signed to us. Thank you. And we've got the Tainted in the bookshop. So, Cauvery, thank you for coming into us.
Thank
and
you.
We
Thanks
wish
for
you
your
so
support.
well.
Thanks for your
Okay,
support.
thank
Really
you.
appreciate it.
And just to say that this is our book club choice of the month, and we're all reading this at the moment. Well, I've already read it, but like the other members of the book club are reading this at the moment, so it's a good read.
So I'm going to talk about a few gorgeous books we got in this week. Of course, I choose books that I love myself and want to read, and I can't read all of them, so I hope some of the customers will come and buy them and read them. This is one called The Quarter. It's stories by Maghreb Mahfouz, which I'm sure I'm not pronouncing properly. He's an Egyptian and he won the Nobel Prize for Literature in the 1990s. This collection of short stories was discovered not that long ago. He wrote them in 1994, and it's in this gorgeous little book. So the beginning, there's a foreword by Elif Shafak, who's a Turkish writer who was shortlisted for the Booker Prize with her book
10 minutes, 38 seconds in this strange land.
And Neil's read that book and quite a few of her other books, and they are amazing. But there's a really lovely, quirky beginning to the story, so I'm just going to read that briefly. This is how she first discovered Naguib Mahfouz. She'd never read anything of his before. The owner of the bookshop, this is in Istanbul, the owner of the bookshop, a sour-tempered middle-aged man with thick glasses and a haircut that had never been popular in any era, genuinely loved books and equally disliked human beings. That's not us, by the way. At times, he would randomly pick a customer and quiz him or her on their knowledge of literature, history, science, or philosophy. We've never quite gone that far, have we? I had seen him scold people before, and though I had never witnessed it myself, urban legend held that he refused to sell books to customers who failed his tests. No doubt there were many other bookshops in the city where you didn't have to inhale dust or risk bumping your head on the door frames, and where you could choose books without being grilled by the owner. Yet I kept returning to this place. Getting the bookseller's seal of approval felt like a rite of passage and unspoken challenge. Young and vain as I was, I secretly wanted him to question me on French, English, or Russian novels in translation, which I believed were my strong point. But on this rainy day in late autumn, he looked at me and asked, "So have you read Mahfouz?" I froze. I had no idea who he was talking about. Slowly, I shook my head. The bookseller said nothing, though his disappointment was visible. When I finished perusing and walked to the till, ready to pay for the books I had selected, he turned towards me with a frown. For a moment I feared he was going to kick me out of the shop. Instead, he grabbed a book from the shelf behind him and pushed it into my hands. Then he said aloud and clear, "Read him." So I guess I'm doing that to you guys too. Read him. It's absolutely amazing. Gorgeous, gorgeous stories. These other two, My End is My Beginning. This is a Turkish writer too, I believe, and it's about how the saviors, autocrats we call them, of the world think that they're saving the world, and this is a novel about a world in which the saviors haven't really saved the world. So it's fascinating and so relevant to today and what's going on in the politics. Maurice Farhi. And lastly, we have a book, The Birds They Sang. Birds and people in life and art. During COVID, we have sold so many books about birds and nature. This one came in this week. It's by a Russian naturalist, and he talks about human interactions and how that affects birds and vice versa. So again, gorgeous book, lovely produced and amazing stories. So those three are my favourites for this week. So now we go over to Tom. And I did a short interview with Tom. I asked him 3 or 4 questions and see what you think. Hi Tom, we've got Tom here with us today on Tertulia TV. So welcome, Tom.
Well, thank you very much for having me.
Tom Benjamin is our author of A Quiet Death in Italy. You'll see it's an absolutely beautiful cover. We love the cover. We came across Tom during COVID when there was a lot of features being done on Twitter about debut novelists who were publishing during COVID and didn't have a chance to promote their book as much as they'd love to. So that's how we came across you. And we loved that book. So it's lovely to talk to you today. Now, Tom, you're a journalist by trade, I understand, and you've worked on many social issues, and we'll get to that later. And your book is set in Bologna, where you now live, I understand. So just before I ask you some questions, my take on it so far, yesterday I had the day off, so I set to reading your book. I'm about halfway through. And from the book I can see, oh my God, so first of all, it's set in Bologna, so it's beautifully set the scene. I'm immediately in Bologna in Italy. There's communists in there, there's anarchists. You even mentioned restorative justice at one point. You've got personal tragedy. You've got, and most importantly, you've got a murder. So tell us, Tom, then, what's your inspiration for this book? Why did you decide to write this kind of book at this time?
Well, I think there was an Italian journalist, Beppe Severgnini, who used to be the London correspondent for Corriere della Sera, and he said something along the lines of foreigners write books about Italy, and they're either kind of, about their great love for Italy or their diaries of disappointment. And I didn't really want to write either. I came to Italy by accident, really. My wife was offered a job here, and I found myself living in Italy. And I didn't really kind of come here with any preconceived ideas. And as a journalist, of course, my kind of modus operandi is to have this sort of desire to describe the world around me. And I found myself, because I had to learn the language, well, I started working. I started off. I did a 3-month course in Italian, and I learned really well how to ask for directions to the swimming pool. But as soon as I went onto the street, an Italian would speak to me, and I'd find it almost impossible to understand them. So in the end, I ended up getting a job, basically at the door of a homeless canteen, and I spent about a year there, and I really kind of came into contact with a different kind of Italy. And it definitely wasn't an Italy of under the Tuscan sun. It definitely wasn't the sort of Italy that most tourists experienced. And that really got me thinking about the other Italy. What is the other Italy, and how could I describe that? And then it wasn't until I started reading a book called Naples 44 by Norman Lewis, which was his record of his time as a kind of secret policeman working in Naples at the end of the Second World War, but it was a true account. And I was just completely absolutely blown away by it. It was just so fascinating. And this kind of outsider insider account of Italy, and describing Italy as an outsider but being very much on the inside, was something that really captured my imagination. And that really kind of gave me my idea, really. I thought, well, this is how I can actually present the Italy that I'm experiencing as a sort of private investigator in modern day Italy, rather than the Italy of 70 years ago.
Wow, God, yeah, no, that does come across definitely in what I've read so far. And I love the idea that it's a private investigator, that you set the story around that, and you've managed to weave your story around that guy. Interesting now you've explained that, but when I was reading it yesterday, I thought, are you Daniel? Daniel is the private investigator. I was thinking, is that really you? Is that really this guy? Maybe it's not really, but is it? Is there some of you in that character?
Well, I think there's some of this in all of our characters to some extent, because as a writer, you have to breathe life into almost any character, whether they're good or bad, and to make them convincing. I think that you draw on your own experience. As far as Daniel's concerned, I think because he's a first person narrator. There is the tendency to think of the I as me, because that's precisely what I wanted the reader to do. Because it was quite deliberate to go with this kind of first person narrator, because in a way it kind of reduces the barriers to getting inside the story, and I wanted the reader to sort of discover and explore the mystery of Italy as I was doing myself. As far as Daniel himself is concerned, well, his life, his family life, his situation where he lives, and to some extent his background is all very different to mine. And in a sense also, I suppose, is sort of an idealized version, in so much as he's sort of more of a kind of Raymond Chandler, Philip Marlowe sort of character. I very deliberately wanted to sort of make this kind of ordinary hero kind of character, because I think that I really love the novels of Raymond Chandler, and I really love that kind of idea as the PI as this sort of tarnished knight. And that was the sort of character I hoped to create with him. So yeah, it can be difficult to sort of divorce yourself from the I. And obviously there are similarities, but I very much see Daniel as a different person, and I tend to think of him, as very much a different person.
Yeah, thanks. I think you have achieved that definitely with the character. Yeah, I said I couldn't put it down yesterday, so I'm looking forward to the rest of it. And one other thought, lastly, that occurred to me is that you talked about describing that other side of Italy, and I love that about the book. I absolutely do. How do people in Bologna? How do you think people in Bologna will think of that? Or it's not. Has it been translated into Italian yet? No.
No, it hasn't. At the moment, it's actually with someone who is a translator, and we'll see what happens there. The whole world of book rights and so on is a bit of a mystery to me, to be honest with you. But it has actually been read by a few Italians, not least my wife, who's one of my most let's say constructive critics, and I've been really pleased with the reaction, actually, I have to say, and not a little relieved, because obviously I am a foreigner. I've lived in Italy. Well, we moved here about a dozen years ago, but I've only really lived here for about 8 years. And yes, I have sort of kind of dived into Italian life and worked here and so on in different roles. But I'm still an outsider. I'm still a foreigner, and so I was, a bit nervous about that. But basically, all of the Italians that have read it have really enjoyed it. I think also because Italians really enjoy, and I don't know if this is the same with other nationalities. I know I always like reading kind of books about an American living in Britain or what have you, and I think Italians are really fascinated to know how others perceive them. And no one's actually said to me, well, that's wrong. So I see that as a positive sign.
Yeah, well done. God, you are doing well. Well, thanks, Tom, for coming on, and we'll be stocking the books in the shop. Well, we've sold some already, but we'll be selling some more. And yeah, we look forward to your second book, actually. Are you working on another book?
Yes. The hunting season is now with the proofreader, and it's a series, a Daniel Lester series. So that is sort of, if the first book kind of is more focused around the political history and the sort of struggle between the different cultures in Bologna, the second book looks more at kind of Bologna city of food, the way that the city is trying to sell itself around food, and questions around authenticity, and some of the tensions that exist there. So that should be due out as an ebook, I think, in the autumn, and in paperback in spring next year. So looking forward to that.
Okay, Tom, yeah, we look forward to that too, and best of luck with your novel, and we hope to see you either in Bologna or here sometime.
You're most welcome, and thank you very much for having me. It's been a real pleasure.
Thank you.
That was enlightening, and that's it really, I guess.
Yeah, and we look forward to selling lots of his books.
His lovely book, yes.
And he's working, as he said, on his second. Well, he's finished his second, and he's actually working on his third book.
Well.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that's it for this week. So thanks for listening, and yeah, talk to you soon.